Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Welcome all you citizens of the world. I'm Michael James, and it's time for another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. We're up here in Chicago's 49th Ward. Been an interesting week, of course, on the political front and the world affairs front. There's still serious challenges going on, both in Gaza and in Africa and in Ukraine. They did make a mark on the Russian invaders. I took a trip this week out to Galena and beyond to the Mississippi River, dipped my hands in the Mississippi. It was great to get out of the city, even if it was just for 24 hours, to see wildflowers, horses, cows, etc. I encourage people to do something, anything to keep you positive and moving in a good direction. Today, we're going to have two groups of guests. The first will be the All-Chicago Tenants Alliance folks, and they'll talk a little bit about what their organization does and what rent strikes are all about. And then we're going to go back to another interview with Howard Mandel, the jazz writer, talking all things jazz. So I encourage you all to stick around for the next hour, wherever you're getting this show, on the radio, stream, YouTube, CAN TV. We're on all those places, and we're glad you're tuned in. Be right back with a little bit of music first, and then our first guest.
Every day I had a bruise. Every day I had a bruise. 'Cause when you see me worrying, pretty baby, it's you I do hate to lose. Nobody loves me. Nobody seems to care. Nobody loves me. Yeah. Nobody.
Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of June 6th. And those who are regular listeners or viewers of this show know that I will evoke past radical progressive organizations. We've talked about Rising Up Angry. We've talked about Join Community Union, as well as the Young Lords and the Black Panther Party. Back in the day, we did some rent strikes, along with a lot of other efforts to organize people in the community to work for a better life for all. And one of the things that we did back then was have some rent strikes. And I got a phone call from a young fellow who was affiliated with the All-Chicago Tenants Alliance, wanting to know a little bit about Rising Up Angry. And somehow during the conversation, he let me know that there was a rent strike or a rally for a rent strike that was going on over on Broadway near Tyler. And that's not too far. We did some back in the middle to late 60s. And so I went down there, took some pictures, met a number of people, including the three guests that I have today. That'd be Danny Rosa, Maya Odendahl, and Miles Bennett Hogerty. Is that right?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Close enough. So good day to the three of you, and I'm so glad you could join me. You really got me pretty excited that there was a group of young people who were not only checking out what us older progressive radical types did in the past, but were actually carrying out some activities that are designed to make things better in the world of rents for a number of people in this city and beyond. So with all that said, how about you all telling me and our listeners and viewers, what is the All-Chicago Tenants Alliance?
Okay, so the All-Chicago Tenants Alliance is kind of what we would usually call a tenant union, but that's not strictly true anymore. We began as an individual tenant union around a single landlord, but once we kind of reached the extent of that organizing, we decided to try and get something going across the entire city of Chicago. So what we do is we try to put together tenant unions and then bring existing tenant unions into contact with other unions. We believe kind of in this strategy of getting unions up before they're absolutely necessary. So before like a crisis happens, we hope that people will be like already talking, already organizing and ready. And yeah, a lot of our work happens on Saturdays. We go out into the neighborhoods and talk to people, or go to tenants we're already working with and talk to them and help them organize their union in like a stronger basis.
How about telling us a little bit about that first tenant union, or the first organization you had? I believe it was in Logan Square. What brought that into being, and what encouraged you to all get involved?
Yeah, so it was in Logan Square, and it kind of sprung up during COVID. There was a wave of tenant organizing around the like lockdown evictions that were kind of happening across the city, and people were pushing for an eviction moratorium. And this organization called the North Spalding Renters Association came up out of that, around all of our kind of shared landlord at the time, who was a guy named Mark Fishman, somewhat notorious in Logan Square. And we organized kind of just those tenants for a while and had some experience building what we called an intra-landlord organization, which would be a tenant organization based around a single portfolio and not looking at like the neighborhood or the city, except to like get support, but mainly organizing tenants towards a rent strike. And we learned like a lot of lessons in that period, especially about like the limits of kind of what is possible under the residential landlord tenant ordinance, and like kind of the legal remedies that tenants have, which really inform our practice going into the citywide organization.
What are the legal ramifications or limits, or what can you actually do? I know that back in the old days, we did get an agreement, and there was some enforcement mechanism through the city, but are rent strikes legal, or are they not legal? Give us a little on that.
So rent strikes aren't strictly legal. It's considered kind of a civil thing because withholding all of your rent is breaking the contract. And typically the strategy of a true rent strike is to incentivize the landlord to negotiate with you instead of going to the courts. But we initially ran into this kind of ordinance that had been passed in the 80s. And some people say it's, one of the strongest or most tenant-friendly ordinances in the country, the residential landlord tenant ordinance. We found that wasn't exactly true. It has like repair and deduct measures, and it has withholding measures for various things. And there's a lot of conditions on those. And what we found is that often the conditions really limit the tenants. It makes it so that the economic pressure isn't really hitting the landlord, and it's more of like telling the landlord, we're allowed to do this. And the landlord typically will say no, and then it's a court matter. So it kind of takes away the tenant's leverage, is what we found, and relies on purely legal leverage.
What's that status of that first building on Spalding, I think it was? And I used to live on Spalding in my youth.
That was the building that I lived in. It's more or less all turned over now. So nobody who's really been able to stick it out through that has remained.
Well, since that first effort, how have you expanded? How did the organization come into being? Who were the people who started it? Where did you come from? What led you to get into this mode of work and organizing?
I can answer that a little bit and then maybe pass it on. I came in a little bit late through that first landlord, and we really kind of had this moment where we did the legal rent withholding that I was talking about, and realized kind of how weak that was. And it ended up with some of us being pushed out of our apartments in more or less official ways. And so we kind of already had built up this strong central body, this strong organizing group that was meeting weekly. And we felt like we had the capacity to do something bigger and maybe bring things to the other neighborhoods. So we still organize in Logan, but we opened it up to the other neighborhoods around Logan, like Garfield and Lawndale and Austin. And so we now have unions in those neighborhoods as well.
You know, you said that during the pandemic, there was a lot of tenant activity, and I'm not sure what other groups are out there. How are you different or similar to any other organizations in Chicago?
Do you want to talk about this, Danny?
Yeah. So the pandemic brought about an organization, a kind of spontaneously formed organization called the Chicago Tenants Movement. And this is how NSRA actually was supported in its first few months of organizing. Since then, CTM has disbanded or dissolved. And there are a few traces of organizations still remaining since the pandemic thrust. There's also a pre-pandemic organization called the Autonomous Tenants Union in Albany Park. Otherwise, we don't really come into contact with many from that period, from the pandemic period. And NSRA kind of sustained itself. Now, as far as we're concerned, like we are, for one thing, we are organized around the rent strike. This is kind of a general strategy that we kind of hold to be the central strategy that tenants have, because it has an economic basis, and so we're quite a considerable amount less concerned with doing legal based organizing. This presents a lot of problems, as you can imagine, because it requires quite an organizing effort to convince tenants to pursue what are certainly high risk type tactics. But we consider this a task of ours to overcome and be able to raise consciousness and raise the level of our organization to a state where we can actually bring tenants to this point. And we currently have, we're working with two tenant unions right now against the same landlord who are on rent strike. And so we think that this sets us apart. For one thing, because the rent strikes have not been very central to tenant organizing at all in the last several decades. And another thing that sets us apart is that we're trying to do the citywide movement. We're trying to build a citywide movement explicitly. And we approach this from a perspective of unifying the movement under one kind of strategic center. So we believe that all of the city needs to be organized and in communication and working together on a level that goes beyond what is current, which is kind of coalition-based organizing. In the tenant world, in the housing justice world, we are much more favorable to the idea of centralizing and building out one strong, unified, strategic center of organization. So I think between the strikes, and that sets ACTA apart. And I would also say something that Maya mentioned earlier, like we attempt to build unions from the ground up, so to speak. And that means going into buildings without the existence of a crisis. So like typically an organization like MTO might receive calls on their hotline for tenants in crisis who are dealing with evictions or really bad conditions or oppression from the landlord. We want to organize tenants on the principle of organization itself as like a political way of living and being in their communities and in their neighborhoods, like building up fighting unions that are going to want to exist beyond the kind of passing day-to-day struggles that we're always dealing with as tenants. We want unions permanent, in place, ready to fight and be offensive rather than defensive. So that's another one. That's another thing that I think ACTA really strives to do that I think is a little bit different than maybe like the approaches of other tenant organizations or housing justice organizations.
Well, I like that idea of building an organization, kind of preemptive before stuff comes down, but probably that's difficult. I mean, people got their lives to live, and you're coming in with, an idea that's a great idea, but it's a little bit foreign to a lot of people, I would imagine. And, say, well, I'm not sure who else is going to be in on it. You do seem to have quite a bit of support on that. the rally that you held at the Broadway building, and I'm not sure of the address, you can tell us, but I was very much impressed not only with the people they were mostly Latinos who lived in the building, and as usual, it's the women who kind of are the spokesmen and in the vanguard, so to speak, and they all spoke, and you had quite a large crowd. I mean, there were Black, Latino, white, young, I was the oldest, I think, but a whole lot of people there. Talk a little bit about that particular building, how you came upon it, the status of it, and the actions that you've taken against that landlord.
I can say a little bit.
You maybe start with BSTA a little bit.
Yeah. So that building is kind of typically, or out of what we would typically consider our range. We don't like go into those neighborhoods up north like very proactively just because of how far away they are. But we actually found them through kind of this principle that I was talking about before of like intra-landlord organizing. We met some tenants in Logan Square who were dealing with basically being pushed out, non-renewals from their landlord. And they wanted to fight. So we started organizing them. And as the process of organizing them moved on, we started looking at all of the other buildings that the same guy owned. And it turns out that he had been buying up a bunch of buildings in one big spree. And then, taking these low income buildings and just kind of flipping them or wanting to flip them. So the first step is push everyone out. And that's kind of when we arrived on the scene up there and knocked on doors. We found out that a lot of those tenants had been living there for like 20, 30, some even 40 years.
Yeah.
There's like a few people who were like born living in that building, and now they're like adults our age, and they remember like growing up there. And a lot of these tenants, another kind of thing that happens is the previous landlord was less big business, less official, and cut the tenants a break in some ways, would like do payment plans. And of course, when the building turns over and the new owners come in, they don't recognize any of that. They just want the money. They want to get everyone out as soon as possible. So that was 120 days after their month-to-month lease expired. And then they want to basically renovate the entire thing, turn it into luxury apartments.
I'm thinking about the general situation in the country right now where you have hedge funds buying up all kind of property, rents being driven up. I know in Rogers Park, up here in the 49th Ward, I think 70% of the people are renters, probably 17, and it could be higher percent are behind in their rent. And I'm just, how do you see, it seems to me there's going to be a lot of opportunity to organize tenants, but I'm also wondering, your thoughts about, do you want to focus only on a single issue, or do you see building an organization that takes on other issues too, and that people are involved not only say in tenants, but with the police situation, education, just, I'm thinking back to my own experience, both in Join and Rising Up Angry, where we did not only some housing stuff, but we also did women, we also did the military, also did the police. Your thoughts on that and the future of building your organization, where it might take you?
Yeah, I can start that and then maybe pass it off to Miles. But we're somewhat of a two-sided organization where we have our tenant organizing in the city, and we also have this other side, which is educational, like you mentioned. And the place that we're currently speaking from is called the School of Many Questions. We have connections with some like international organizations that we can also talk about. Danny can probably mention that. And we also print a newspaper as part of, tenant organizing, but we want it to like become more of a general tool to help people see like what's going on in the city, and maybe more like Rising Up Angry.
So you just mentioned that you put out a newsletter. I think it's called Tenants Talk. Tell us a little bit about that. How many do you print? Who does the layout? In the old days, we used to have to glue stuff and paste it down. Now it's streamlined.
Not much has changed. I guess it's kind of it's a lot of not gluing stuff together, I guess, but using a lot of collage.
Oh, I love the idea, though, of putting out newspapers, newsletters. I think that, to quote Lenin, he talked about the role of a newspaper in a pre-party situation. And that was our motivation, partly in Rising Up Angry, to start a paper to build an organization. And how far and wide do you spread your Tenants Talk newsletter?
Yeah, it's funny. So I guess the paper didn't really precede the organization. It was initially like an organ of NSRA, and now as we've transitioned into ACTA, been an organ for this organization. We don't print too many right now. Most of what we use the newspaper for is going into buildings that we're looking to sprout organizations from. So it's going directly to tenant stores. We have it at a few coffee shops here and there around our neighborhoods and in the West Side as well. But more or less, it just kind of has all kinds of stuff for tenants, updates on organizations in the city, theory that we're putting together on against landlord ideology. It's got an activity page too for kids. You can see that. But yeah, we basically have a handful of us in the organization that are responsible for overseeing its production, and that means laying it out, that means writing things, that means printing it. We do that in-house as well. It's kind of an all in-house operation.
Well, before we run out of time, how do people contact you, and how do they get a hold of the All-Chicago Tenant Alliance?
Yeah. The best way to reach us is probably through our website at chicagotenants.com. You can reach out to us if you're interested in organizing with us, either as an organizer or looking to have a union in your building or support us financially. The Rent Strike Fund in particular, this is a fund that directly helps striking tenants in the city. This would be a huge push for people to help support us donating to that. That's available on the website.
Let's go back to that current red strike on Broadway, which has been going on. Tell us how long it's been going on, and tell us a little bit about your visit to the landlord's neighborhood. I remember in my own experience going to a Gutman-owned building, and we went up to the suburbs to his house, and we put out flyers saying your neighbor is a slumlord, and he called us later that day and settled. What's been your experience by going out to the building owner's abode?
We go to his house quite a lot. And the last time we were there, actually after the rally that you were at, we left and sent a kind of contingent of people up there. He was home and he came out on the doorstep, and we had a little bit of a spat with him. And he was telling us while we were in his front lawn that there was no union. Like, he was trying to pretend as if there was no bargaining units, so to speak, and we were all right there on his lawn, so we were kind of yelling back and forth with him, asking him to sit down and negotiate with the union, which he kept refusing to do. It's been kind of like that. The neighbors are very interested in what's happening when we're there. Sometimes they're friendly, sometimes they're hostile. He doesn't like it. He certainly doesn't like it when we're there.
Do you have any upcoming events? And before I even hear you say that, I want to say I would love to have you come back sometime to keep us abreast of what's going on, because it's a short window here, and there's a lot more to talk about. I know you want to reach out to people throughout the city, and then it's like, if you don't win, how do you still keep people involved? There's a lot of challenges. Give me a little bit of a parting shot here, what you'd like people to take away from hearing about your organization.
I think the main thing is, like, we want to help you organize your buildings. If you're not interested in organizing your building, you can support us through dues. You can donate to the Strike Fund, which you can find through the website. We basically think that the whole city of Chicago needs to be organized. The tenants need to be organized on an economic basis, and we are up to the challenge of doing that with you. And we have a quite strong organization of really committed and dedicated people that's growing quickly, and we will go, and we're interested. We'll take calls from anywhere and consider anything. So we would love to hear from anybody who's dealing with landlord terror or not, who just wants to organize. We're ready.
Well, I'm looking forward to talking to you and, seeing you more often. I was very much impressed with that rally and very much excited that there's some younger people were interested in some of the things that we had done in Rising Up Angry. And let me let you know, I have talked to other former members of Rising Up Angry, which were still like members of it, and they're up for getting together and having some good conversation.
We would love that like a lot. And I just wanted to show you on one of our tennis talks, we put an old Rising Up Angry cartoon on the cover, in fact.
All right. All power to the people. Keep up the great work. Onward through thick and thin. We can all do it as long as we stick together.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, everybody else, stay tuned. Let's hear a little bit of jazz. We're going to come back with the jazz writer Howard Mandel and get an update on jazz festivals and performances going on around the city, things people should know about. We'll be right back with more live from the Heartland for the week of June 6th.
Think about, can't get you out of my head. Your love is all I think about, can't get you out of my head. Set me free, just come over and be with me. Can't get you out of my head, your love is all I think about. Can't get you out of my head, your love is all I think about. Come on over and be with me.
Welcome back, all you listeners and viewers of this week's Live from the Heartland show. And you regular listeners and viewers know that a few weeks back we had the jazz writer Howard Mandel talking about a jazz writers awards that were coming up. And I asked him right there on the air if he would come on regularly, maybe once a month, to give us a jazz update. So, Howard, good day to you. I'm so glad you're back for your monthly appearance on this show. And one of the things that, in going over what we might talk about, came up was the AACM, the Advancement of Creative Musicians. You can give me the correct name. They're about 60 years old. And, from Fred Anderson to a lot of other people, I think, they made a real mark on the music industry, particularly in jazz. So how about giving us a little history and what you want to share about the AACM?
Sure. Thanks, Mike, for having me on again. It's really exciting to be here. So the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians is sort of a members cooperative that got established in 1965. And it has produced a large number of American musicians really at the forefront of experimenting and composing and improvising in really fresh and impactful ways. They've been very influential. Later today, I get to talk to Henry Threadgill, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner. He was an early member of the AACM, and now he's in New York, and he's a world-renowned musician. And that'll be exciting. I'm doing a Downbeat article on the 60th anniversary of the festival. So I've talked to a number of people recently who are involved with the organization now and who were back 60 years ago. And I was really lucky living on the south side of Chicago in the 60s. I began to hear some of this music, and I thought, wow, this is amazing stuff, because they were moving away from standard song form. They were experimenting with timbres and instrumentation. Everybody seemed to play 4 or 5 instruments. The music was very expressionistic. It was very vivid and emotional and powerful. And I thought, wow, this is great. And actually, nobody seemed to be writing very much about it. And that set me on a course, a professional course that I followed, all these 60 years. I started writing about the AACM in around 1968, and I was hearing them from 67 on. So I've followed them for a long time, and I've seen a lot of developments. I know a lot of these musicians. In Chicago now, people like Kahil El-Zabar, Edward Wilkerson, uh, Ernest Dawkins, Nicole Mitchell, the flutist, Ben Lamar Gay, the cornetist, Mike Reed, people who just really have had a lot of impact. Roscoe Mitchell from the Art Ensemble of Chicago. And Fred Anderson, of course, we miss from the days of the Velvet Lounge. He's been deceased for, I guess, about a decade now, which is unfortunate, but he left a great legacy. And the AACM, which also has a school training program for young musicians in Chicago, and it tries to get most of its members involved in that, teaching. Renee Baker is a classically trained violinist who now is the chair of the AACM. I spoke to her a few days ago, and she's got plans to increase the number of concerts that they hold. They have a space of their own now in a church on the west side, and their concerts are usually free.
Has the AACM been almost all African American? Are there any white or Latino dudes and dudettes in there?
It has been almost completely African American, and that was a matter of some contention back in the 60s and into the 70s. George Lewis, the trombonist and educator, and he wrote a book called Power Greater Than Itself, the AACM and contemporary, what's he call it? Contemporary experimental music. And he goes into detail about the discussions of whether this should be a African-American only organization. And I think it has been that in practice, if not in constitution. There are some white musicians I know in New York who have been associated with the AACM putting on concerts. Marty Ehrlich, who is a alto saxophone player originally from St. Louis, and he's a white guy. He's performed, and there are a few others. But the AACM musicians operate independently, mostly. So this is one of the unique things about this organization. It encourages individuals to do their own things. And in many cases, AACM musicians do work with Latin or Asian or Caucasianly, ethnically white musicians, but outside of AACM confines.
Well, we're big fans of Rainbow Coalition kind of stuff. Chicago is a wonderful place that has people from everywhere, and I know we all move from our own little sectors, but there's plenty of crossing over and working together. One of the things that you mentioned in our correspondence was the Jazz Institute had a gala recently, and our old friend Lauren Deutsch was involved. Lauren Deutsch was involved with the Jazz Institute, and I haven't followed it as much lately. But I think there was recently a performance by Branford Marsalis with some local people involved. How about you give us a little bit on that before we go into all these upcoming festivals that are going to keep us busy on our off time?
Sure. Well, the Jazz Institute, like many of the nonprofits, does gala fundraising, and this was just last week. Branford Marsalis was the headliner of this very posh gala fundraiser at the Hilton Hotel, and there were about 450 people there to raise money for the Jazz Institute. I think they raised almost $100,000. So this was great. The Institute needs this kind of funding since the NEA has cut back on funding jazz-related activities. Orbert Davis and his partner, Mark, his business partner, were celebrated at the Jazz Institute Gala, and they announced that they were establishing a scholarship in the name of Lauren Deutsch for a woman to study jazz. And Lauren was there. I had urged her to attend. She had been reluctant, but she loves the Institute, but she's been she retired from being executive director of the Institute 6 years ago, I believe. She still works on the archive committee, which I also work on, and we have some really exciting news about that, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But anyway, I had to persuade Lauren to attend this, and Orbert Davis also had said, well, we're going to do something kind of nice for you, so it'd be nice for you to be there. And so Lauren came, and they announced this from the stage, and she was floored and just amazed, then pleased, and said there's nothing that she would rather have her name associated with more than a scholarship.
I'm going to spill a few beans about Lauren. She was one of my very first students when I taught a class called Organizing for Social Change at Columbia College. She later became a member of Rising Up Angry, which was an organization I was affiliated with. And she's just a wonderful person, and I'm so glad. And you mentioned Orbert Davis, and let me just tell you, last night I participated in this Picha Kucha. I'm not sure how you say it, but it's a worldwide event that's held on a Tuesday night. And I think the next one in Chicago will be at the Martyrs in September. But I was asked to present there by a fellow named Michael Jackson, who's a British guy who's very talented. And he was playing a hell of a saxophone, and Orbert Davis was blowing us away with his trumpet. So talk a little bit about the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic, which Orbert Davis is involved with. And it focuses a little bit on Cuban music, immigrant communities. They got an event around Helen Scott coming up. Fill us in. Yeah.
Well, the Philharmonic is another one of the really fine Chicago organizations that are, promoting jazz in many forms and have a mission to include young people in training, teaching, and especially recognition of immigrant communities in Chicago, which are no longer immigrant communities, but are communities that, have ethnic backgrounds and their own cultures. One of the things that Orbert has done has been to take musicians from Chicago to Cuba to perform and to steep themselves in the Afro-Cuban rhythms and traditions. And then he's also brought Cuban musicians back to Chicago, which is a major feat. It's very tricky to get the visas and permissions to do that. But he had a young coterie, I think there were almost 24, and they performed at the Auditorium Theater with very little rehearsal, with great spirit and wonderful results. I hope he's able to do something like that again. But Orbert and the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic perform in a couple of different venues around Chicago, North Side and South Side. I think he lives in Beverly. And he's just a wonderful guy. He's also performed on the Jazz Festival stage, the Chicago Jazz Festival stage.
When you mentioned, let me just throw in, when you mentioned bringing musicians from Cuba, I brought the band Mezcla, and we brought them a number of times, and I think the Hot House brought them too, but we couldn't bring them during the Bush years. And I imagine that bringing people in under the trumpet years is going to be hard, but we shall see.
Yeah, well, I mean, the important thing is to keep this music going here, and all the Caribbean musics, draw from the Afro-Cuban base legacy. So there is a Latin Jazz Festival coming up in Humboldt Park. I think that is July 11th and 12th. And I'm not sure who the artists are, but there'll be it would be great if there were some Cuban musicians at that event. I don't know who's been booked. We have a responsibility to try to reach out and to hear that music because it's so influential. It lies under so much we do. And there has been a very strong Chicago-Cuban connection through Hot House and people like Barbara Dane. So let's keep that going.
Well, tell us a little bit about some other festivals and things going on. I know the Hyde Park Jazz Festival isn't until late September. the 27th and 28th, but they've been around doing a festival for 19 years, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit about it? And I understand they're challenged because of loss of funds.
Well, that's true. They lost a $30,000 grant that they expected to get from the federal government, from the NEA, I think. And that put a little crimp in their planning, but they are trying to rebound. And their gala is June 25th, I think. So they're fundraising there. And interestingly, the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic's gala is the next day. So there's a lot of trying to stir up the base and say, come on, like, let's contribute to keep this music happening here. The Hyde Park Jazz Festival has been so great. It is also free or paid by donation. It's multiple stages all through Hyde Park. They have a like an avenue of music that runs along the midway and with stages at both ends. And they have concerts at Logan Square, the Logan Center. They have concerts at Court Theater, one of the churches that's in Hyde Park. So it's really hard to get to everything. And the climax of the day, it's a 2-day festival. The climax Saturday night is a concert in Rockefeller Chapel. So it's usually a soloist to take advantage of or to deal with the challenging acoustics of Rockefeller Chapel. It can be a very beautiful event at the end of the day. It's a great festival. I mean, Kate Doubleton is responsible for a lot of the curation, and she has really great tastes. And they've brought in fantastic musicians from outside Chicago and hiring the most exciting Chicago musicians also. It's a really great thing to, it's a nice time of year. It's nice to sit out by the Midway or to ramble around Hyde Park. I always enjoy that a lot. And people turn out. I mean, it's really a community festival, as is the Chicago Jazz Festival, which happens on Labor Day weekend, as is the Latin Jazz Festival. These are all really neighborhood, community-oriented events, which is wonderful. And the Blues Festival this weekend, even.
I'm going to ask you about the Blues Festival and some overlap between blues and jazz. But I also I heard last night about Hazel Scott, and I'm wondering that the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic is putting on an event at the Logan Center on June 25th. And I wonder if you could tell us who Hazel Scott was, what her situation is, and how this all came to be.
Oh, gee, Hazel Scott was a pianist and a vocalist in the New York Harlem late night milieu in the 50s, mostly, I think, is when her star was highest. And I believe she was married to Adam Clayton Powell, the African-American politician. And she was a very sophisticated lady and player. I mean, I always think of her in terms of Lena Horne or someone along those lines. And this is sort of pre-Nina Simone. So she was not as politically direct and aggressive, assertive perhaps. But she was making a dent in civil rights support. And I never have talked to Orbert about his enjoyment of her. So I'm sort of surprised that he's focused on her, but she's a good person to bring up and to shine some light on her music. That'll be fun.
Howard, we've talking a little bit about all these festivals, and the Chicago Jazz Festival comes up, and I'm wondering if you can recall some of your favorite performances that you saw there.
Oh, gosh. My favorite performances at the Chicago Jazz Festival. There's so many. Betty Carter trio playing in a heavy rainstorm, and we all sat in Grant Park with our coats over our heads to try and protect ourselves. And she was so amazed that we were staying there. Oh, I love that show. There was a Sun Ra performance in which at the end of the day, Again, this was at the Petrillo Band Shell, and he had everybody in Grant Park chanting, "We are the people of the sun. We are the people of the sun," while the orchestra was just going crazy on stage. That was fantastic. I've been hearing some of the old performances because I work on the archive committee at the Jazz Institute. We have 850 recordings from the Chicago Jazz Festival from 1979 to 2022. And those concerts, there's the best Miles Davis, Electric Period Miles Davis I've ever heard from 91, 1 year before he died. And he comes out on stage, he's so eager to play and full of ideas. And there's another one I heard that I loved that was Von Freeman with the organ player Charles Erland. And Von, was a very big-hearted Chicago tenor player. And he came out, and Charles Erland is no slouch, and a bluesy kind of guy, and was really known for playing a lot of organ, using every aspect of the organ. And Von started on a really up-tempo bluesy number, and he played it for like 12 minutes. Charles, you could just hear him working to hang on, And then at the end of the performance, Von says on the mic, "Oh, well, Charles, that was really good. I will slow it down for you now." And that was that was hilarious. But there have been many fine performances. I mean,
well, Howard, let me. We're going to have to go out soon, so I'm going to ask you. Since this weekend, listeners and people who stream the show might still take in the Chicago Blues Festival. It's June 5th to the 8th. This show goes up on the 6th. How about there was an article in New City about Frank Catalano, Italian Chicago musician, and the guitarist Lurrie Bell. And Lurrie Bell is always someone who caught my attention. We had him at the Heartland Cafe. And you talk a little bit about, you've talked to me a little bit about the connection between blues and jazz. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Frank and Lurrie and their new album out on Delmark.
The album is called Set Me Free, and it's really fun to listen to. I mean, Lurrie is, I think, the best Chicago blues guitarist after Buddy Guy. I mean, he's really got the sound, and he's lived a hard life in the blues. His father, of course, was Gary Bell, the harmonica player, so he grew up in it. But and he's worked a lot with Billy Branch and Sons of the Blues. But Lurrie himself has a great sound, and he's turned into a good singer also. So Frank Catalano, who's more of a jazz player, kind of a bebopish, hard-blowing player, the two of them have gotten together on this record, Set Me Free. And, it really epitomizes the connection between jazz and blues. I mean, this has always been the case, since 1921, really. The musics are siblings, and we can think of a lot of bluesy, jazzy albums. And so many. King Curtis comes to mind. Somebody who played with Aretha Franklin and also had instrumental hits. Or that's a tenor player who, like Frank Catalano, who could work with the really funky guitar players and with that backbeat and keep the songs edited down. So, they're bite size. That's some of what's going on in their music. And they are the second to the last show on the night that is headlined by Mavis Staples. And that's just the best double feature that you're going to hear in Chicago this weekend.
So that's going to be, for people who are listening or viewing, that's on Sunday, Sunday the 8th. That would be great. Let me throw one more thing at you. Give me a club or two here in Chicago where you saw a performance you liked recently. I'm thinking of the Constellation Room. I don't know if you've been there or what's happening, but that's just one place that comes to mind. What do you got?
Which room was that?
Constellation.
Oh, Constellation. Yes. So the best thing I heard at Constellation, this was just last weekend, was a tribute to the late Mars Williams. And Mars was a member of the NRG ensemble that Hal Russell headed up, composer, kind of a trickster, jokester kind of guy. And Mars worked in pop music with Psychedelic Furs and with the Waitresses. He's famously got a sax solo on the song I Know What Boys Like. And if you want to hear a cute pop song, look that one up on YouTube. But Mars was also a very serious horn player and played with toys and composed music. So at Constellation, there was a tribute concert to him last Saturday, performed by an all-star ensemble. I mean, the horns were Ken Vandermark, Dave Rempis, John Arabagan, Ben Lamargay played cornet. There were a violinist, cellist, guitar player, Steve Marquette. Jeff Albert came up from New Orleans because Mars also had a connection to New Orleans musicians, and they performed this piece that he'd written called The Devil's Whistle. And this piece had been written as a multimedia spectacular for a installation in New Orleans called the Music Village. And it's all these like wooden platforms and like tree houses that the musicians inhabit and play from there. And they showed a film clip of how this worked. And Mars was conducting from the middle of this space. But of course, he's been deceased for just over a year, I think. And these were his friends playing. And this is the North Side Improvisers. This is that coterie of Chicago's jazz scene. Very, very energized. And gosh, they meant this music. This music, so powerful. It was a full house at Constellation. The audience loved it. The playing was high quality, taking us where jazz takes us when it's good. It lifts us up, gives us a lot of energy coming out.
Howard Mandel, thanks so much for coming on. I'll see you next month, if not before. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in today. I want to thank our guests, not only Howard Mandel, but the people from the All-Chicago Tenant Alliance. We encourage you all to do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that Howard does, that Hal does. All of us together, we can make a difference, and there's no time like now to make a difference. All power to the people, over and out. See you next week. We want to thank you for watching the Live from the Heartland show. New episodes air every Friday beginning at 9 a.m. Central Time. Episodes air each following Thursday on CAN TV, 9 p.m. in Sweet Home Chicago on Channel 21 or streaming everywhere else at cantv.org. Audio episodes go live on WLUW each Saturday, 9 a.m. on the left end of your dial at 88.7 FM or streaming everywhere worldwide at WLUW.org. They're available on Apple and Spotify podcasts by looking up Live from the Heartland on either platform and are also broadcast on Lumpen Radio each Friday at 9 a.m. on 105.5 FM and streaming at lumpenradio.com. I'm Michael James, and I'm glad to have been your host. Until next time, remember, do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people. Over and out.
Come to limb. Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing